We talk a lot about hormones on this podcast. Women's health is the biggest thing that we're building right now at LifeMD. And so I've had a lot of guests and we're talking about hormones from all different angles. I don't think we can talk about the testosterone piece enough because there's so much controversy, there's so much confusion, and there's a lot going on. Where do you think we are with testosterone when it comes to the current clinical care that you're seeing?
Oh, we're so far behind.
Mm.
I have women tell me they come to me asking for testosterone. And when they ask their provider for it, the first question they get is, why do you want a male hormone? So providers don't even know that you can check a serum level and women are producing testosterone. Women are afraid of it and what their own body is producing. They're convinced they're going to grow a beard or grow a micro penis or their voice is going to change. And it also scares them that there's no FDA approved product. They're like, if it's so safe, why don't we have a product in the United States? But there's a global consensus statement. You know this, you're a doctor. We agree on nothing, let alone women's sexual health care.
Right.
And there's a global consensus statement supporting the use of testosterone for women. So that's what amazes me, that we yet don't have an FDA approved product for women in this country.
And let's just hit on that. I wanted to talk about the FDA because there have been a couple of different opportunities to speak out with the FDA about testosterone and about hormones in general. So, of
Yep.
course, the FDA had the panel talking about the black box warning on estrogen, and that was successfully removed. So, that's I think, a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. And then there was also a less well publicized panel about testosterone. Now, this was mostly driven by the conversation around men and testosterone, but the conversation around women and testosterone was there too. So why don't we have an FDA approved product? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, people will say lack of data, right? Because women weren't mandated to be in clinical research trials until 1993. They will say the safety that is required by the FDA. So to bring a female versus male product to market is exponentially more expensive because of the testing that they have to do, because of the reproductive cycle that you have to take into account. There's implicit bias. You know this. Women were historically looked at as vehicles for either male pleasure or for birthing babies. And as a board certified OBGYN, my sexual health training was limited to contraception, fertility, and how to treat an infection. And that was it. I never learned about libido, desire, orgasm, sexual satisfaction, any of that. I learned about pain and how to treat it either surgically or medically. But that was it. And so you have to overcome all of that. And when you look at the first ever FDA approved female sexual health drug, it took 6 years to get FDA approved and had, I think, one of the largest data sets ever presented to the FDA. When you look at Viagra, you know it was fast tracked in 6 months, and erectile dysfunction was treated like a national emergency. I talked to a group of 1,200 women a couple weeks ago. Every single woman in the room knew what Viagra was. When I asked them what Addie was or Vyleesi was, a handful of hands went up in
Yeah.
the room. And so, lack of education, data, bias, lack of female leadership, and frank fear of what our own body produces, I think. And then when you hear a doctor shame you, gaslight you, and ask you why you want a male hormone, a lot of women will then become quiet and they'll
Yeah.
become quiet forever. Yeah.
Yeah. They back down and they never bring it up again.
They back down and they never bring it up again. And it really makes me angry and it makes me sad because we're missing such an important opportunity to offer women the data of today, not the myth and misunderstanding of yesterday. And what we do understand about testosterone is it helps us with the domains of sexuality. So those of us who specialize in sexual health care beyond contraception, infection, and fertility, not that those aren't very, very important, those of us who study arousal, orgasm, desire, satisfaction, lubrication, and can actually measure it with validated tools, know that testosterone helps with all those domains. But hold on a second. Testosterone also helps with muscle mass. And we know that's
Yeah.
the organ of longevity, helps with bone density. And I mean, that's where you specialize. And also, there are some studies that show adequate serum levels reduce our risk of dementia. So we know from Lisa Mosconi's work about the estrogen receptors in the brain
Hmm.
and how Alzheimer's disproportionately affects women versus men. And we're understanding that there are distinct changes in the brain that happen from loss of estrogen, not just from aging. So we also now have some preliminary data that testosterone serum levels being adequate may also reduce our risk of dementia and also help with mood.
So you just said so many very exciting things, but I think we need to take a step back and talk about where we are with the guidelines. I know you're very involved in some of the societies, and this is one of the challenges I run into because I talk similarly about testosterone. My job as someone who creates content, as someone who educates, is to read research and come to conclusions. I've not been in a space where my conclusions are more at odds with the guidelines and what the experts are saying than around women's sexual health and testosterone. It just is, to me, it's mind blowing. So can we just take a step back and talk about, I think you mentioned Ishwish, the global consensus statement, the Menopause Society. What are the current guidelines recommending for testosterone clinically?
So it's very limited, but this is the one instance where it is recommended where you check levels. So you want to get women to physiologic levels. You don't want super physiologic is with testosterone where you can get into hirsutism or hair growth where you don't want to voice thickening. I have seen clitoromegaly or what women say, growing a micro penis. Um, uh, so you do want to check levels and then they limit the use of testosterone right now for low libido in menopausal patients. So the guidelines are very limiting. However, you and I both know this, the data is not. So the
Yeah.
guidelines need to catch up to the data because that puts yet another barrier to care because those of our colleagues who will maybe just go by guidelines and not want to go out into that I don't want to say dangerous but kind of lonely environment of going by data, interpreting it, applying it, and then relaying that to your patient and having that kind of discussion together, right?
Yeah.
A lot of doctors are afraid.
Well, I
And
mean, I
yeah.
get it. I get it because I'm right now creating protocols, trying to get this past large legal panels. And, we ask advisors that are, experts in the space, and they oftentimes will disagree with me. And this is one of the hardest areas because they said, oh, well, if you're going to offer testosterone to any woman who's not postmenopause, then, those do not meet the clinical guidelines. And yet, how many women who are technically not through menopause have symptoms that would be benefited by testosterone? And so that's a huge one for me. And then the other challenge I think is that once you step away from the guidelines, especially with a controlled substance where there is so much fear, I try to respect the doctors who are just uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
I know that you have an education platform. It's important that we educate doctors that it's okay to step away from these guidelines in the right circumstances. But then, like you said, you've also seen women who are being treated inappropriately, right? And they're being overdosed and they are seeing physical changes, which are, I mean, I hate to say it, but they're not really reversible, right? And
So yes, some of
the,
those changes are
yeah,
irreversible.
so
Yeah.
there's just a huge opportunity here where we can look at the guidelines, and I look at them as being sort of like the floor, right? Like this is the bottom that we can agree on, I think, as a large community of providers to say, at minimum, we need to be looking at this here. But what I want to talk about is what are all the other things where you think that the research is actually showing benefit? You mentioned some really important ones: cognitive function, dementia prevention, bone health, near and dear to my heart. Obviously, sexual health outside of kind of the pure clinical guidelines around HSDD. And so maybe let's start there. Can you just define for us HSDD or the newer term FSAD? Can you tell us exactly what this diagnostic criteria are for true quote unquote sexual dysfunction in women?
Yeah. But before I do that, can I go back to what you said about protocols and guidelines? And do you
Yes,
remember
please.
the FDA has just said, oops, we kind of messed up and maybe we misled women. And they were doing it right, they're there to make sure drugs do and say what they do, and then to monitor adverse events. But they also had plastered a warning, a black box warning on vaginal products that there wasn't a singular study that ever showed endometrial cancer, breast cancer, heart attack, or stroke from a vaginal product. So
Yeah.
sometimes guidelines can be incorrect. They can be limited. They need to be updated. So that's what I would say. And I love teaching physicians because right now in this country, the sad, scary statistic is one trained provider for every 32,000 patients in need of hormonal care and education. There's
Wow.
that large of a gap. So, as far as HSDD, for those people who have stood up to me and said, you don't need to be prescribing this medication. If a woman decides she doesn't want to have sex and she's fine with it, you're prescribing a date rape medication. I'm like, oh my God, no. So hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSDD, is the lack of either spontaneous desire, which males usually have more than women, right? A spontaneous thought of, or the intent of, I want to have sex, or responsive desire, meaning, there's cues in the environment and you're still not responding. The best example I can give you is that they did a study where they showed all of the participants, they were women, audio or visual erotica, i.e., porn, and then they imaged their brains. And basically, what they saw in the women that were struggling with their desire, or the ones that eventually got diagnosed with hypoactive sexual desire disorder, is their inhibitory signals were really, really high and their excitatory signals were really, really low. And to be in a sexually aroused state, we have to have the opposite because we need to be really excited and the inhibition needs to go away, because then we're thinking about Caroline and all the other things that we need to be doing. And so there is a neurotransmitter issue with a lot of women who struggle with low libido. There can be a lot of other issues and reasons for low libido. It has to be going on for at least 6 months, and not directly attributable to a life event or medication. And then the third thing is it has to be distressing to someone. And I think that's where people also locked on. And when Addie first came out, they were sending people to psychiatrists and saying, is she really in distress? To me, if someone has made an appointment with a doctor to discuss this, or it's affecting their self-confidence or their marriage or their relationships, that's distressing enough. They don't need to
Yeah.
meet a psychiatric metric of being in distress. And what that does is if someone says, hey, listen, that part of my life is over, I'm done, I don't want to, be intimate anymore and I want to focus on other things, great. We're not chasing you with testosterone or Addie or Vyleesi. And then arousal disorder. Arousal can be cognitive. It can be physiologic or physical. That's when your heart rate increases. That's when lubrication increases. That's when we see flushing. That's when we see increased blood flow to the clitoris, to the vagina, to the vulva. And so there are women that struggle with the arousal piece. They may have the desire, but then they can't physiologically or cognitively respond or be in the moment, either with themselves or with their partner. And so there are people that are combining the two, into one diagnosis because they're pretty similar, but yet not. I still like to treat them differently, even though a lot of the therapies are the same.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think this is where it gets challenging too for providers who aren't trained in this. And I know early on, I mean, when I started looking at the guidelines and started thinking, okay, well, how do I prescribe this? I thought, well, I got to get like a psychiatrist on board. Like I gotta like, this is very difficult, you know. But then you talk to a few experts and they say, no, this is a clinical diagnosis that you can make, and you don't have. It's not. It is in the DSM-5, yeah, but it's not a psychiatric disorder that you can't, diagnose on your own as a provider, right?
Yeah, and there's that really easy 4 question screener, right? The DSDS, the decreased sexual desire screener,
Yeah.
that you can do if you're newer to learning about sexual health care, and you're specifically looking at HSDD or low libido. Um, But you're right. You just have to have a conversation with your patient about it. And if you have that opening, what I found is that women want to talk about it and they want a safe space where they can discuss it and then learn about their options.
Yeah, and I can tell you, even as a, as a 40, I just turned 48 yesterday. As a 48-year-old male physician with mostly women patients, I can tell you that that does not get in the way either, right? If you open this door, women generally will talk about it because they want to talk about it.
They want to talk about it, and then the other side of the coin is, not that men don't deserve all of their treatment options, but what I was seeing is all of these men getting Viagra, testosterone, Cialis. There's no discussion, and then
Yeah,
all of a sudden, I mean, the funniest lecture I ever went to, not that this is funny, but it had a humorous angle, is what do you, all of a sudden there's a penis in the room, and they're like, wait a second, we didn't discuss this. No one's looked at my vagina. I have GSM. I have sexual pain. I have dryness. Like, I have no desire either. And so I think when you are addressing a heterosexual couple, you have to look at the female partner as well. And you are right. They are desperate to find someone who will talk to them and help them through, their decision making process. And maybe it is audio erotica, maybe it is just localized hormone therapy, maybe it is testosterone, maybe it is Addyi or Vyleesi, maybe it's
yeah,
couples counseling,
right.
together.
Yeah,
But I didn't answer your initial question. So testosterone we know helps with all the domains of sexuality that I
hmm
had mentioned. Testosterone also helps with mood. I have women who say, "Oh my God, I feel like myself again. I'm not as depressed. I feel more alert. The world feels like it's in color again. It felt very beige or blah, or it was in black and white. I'm not as crabby anymore." They're more willing to be intimate. And by intimacy, I don't necessarily mean intercourse or sex. It means
right,
holding hands and cuddling and avoid no longer avoiding your partner.
right.
It helps with muscle mass. It helps with bone density. I put women back on testosterone and they say their clothes feel different. They have better workouts. And so I think for me, it's immeasurable, the quality of life, but also the longevity benefits that you have when you place someone on testosterone, because sexual health care is healthcare and it's a vital sign. Think about it. When a patient is ill, they're usually not thinking about their sexuality. So to me,
Right.
it's a marker of health.